All right, guys, let's get this going. We're excited to bring back one of our favorite guests, Reggie Walker. He's been on a number of times to talk about a bunch of different topics, but give him a follow on Twitter at rwalk13. You won't be disappointed with that. He's all over the sports world. So with that, Reggie, thanks for joining us, but maybe give our listeners, it's been a minute since you've been on. Give us an update of what you've been doing. It's college basketball season. You obviously were busy during football too.
Yeah, what a I guess calendar year, academic year, how you want to say it.
Yeah.
Check this out. 15 high school games and 14 college games during the fall at all levels of college football. Everything from Charlotte to Gardner Webb at the FCS level. So that was a lot of fun. FCS playoffs, and then some high school basketball doing that as well this winter, along with college basketball. Big South games, Atlantic Sun games. If they call me and I have time, I will talk about some ball. And it's been fun. It's been interesting. I think the coolest part about it is, and this is where I've always shout out to my guy Tom Luganville. This is where I've always given him a lot of credit, because Lugs is one of those guys. He sees these kids in high school because of the ESPN 300 and all the recruiting stuff he does, and then all of a sudden he sees them in college. So he's seen that development. Yeah. From day to day. And it's been interesting because there have been some guys that I sort of at least coached against back in 2017, 2018 that I saw come through college over the last couple of years, to see them develop. And then now seeing some kids that are in high school and kind of projecting them to high school has been a lot of fun, or projecting them to college, I should say, has been a lot of fun. So just watching this and being a part of so many levels of the sport, basketball and football really have been really, really enjoyable to me, but also educational for me. So it's been a busy year, but couldn't be happier. And guys, I remember being on the show. I always love jumping on with you guys. It's always fun. And Matt and I had an interaction a couple of weeks ago. We were talking about McCall Bridges and what he's become in the NBA, and Jalen Brunson also. And I remember us talking about that team when they were in a quest to try to win a national championship at Villanova, and everybody was trying to sort of figure out and project those guys in the NBA. It's amazing the two guys that were sort of older and maybe viewed as a little less athletic are the guys that are still sticking around the NBA and making a lot of plays. So that's where sports can be so much fun, because sometimes you never know.
Yep. Well, speaking of sports, Jared, I'll jump in real quick. Sorry about that. Super Bowl is next Sunday. We're recording on Sunday morning, and we're a week out from Chiefs versus Eagles. Got to get your thoughts there. I mean, we don't have to get too deep into breaking down X's and O's and stuff like that, but I guess what are your thoughts? Is Mahomes going to get number 2? Jalen Hurts going to get his? He's just a winner everywhere he goes. What are you thinking about Super Bowl?
Yeah, Sunday? It's interesting, because the more I look at this matchup and you think about the narratives of both teams, and I think that's kind of the cool part, right, is like Mahomes is considered like the great quarterback that it doesn't matter really the pieces in a lot of ways. You look at who his receivers are, Marquez Valdez-Scantling and those guys, like they're none of those guys for a lot of people are considered that superstar wide receiver. I think they're really good players. And if you're really, really good, surrounded by other really, really good, you can win. But those guys are not considered necessarily that. They're sort of being, in a lot of people's minds, uplifted by the greatness that is Patrick Mahomes. And I'll say two things to that narrative. Isaiah Pacheco is a problem out of the backfield, and so don't slight that at all. And then obviously we saw it last week, and I think last week, and I think what we can't forget is it's still a line of scrimmage league. And I've always thought Chris Jones was pretty good, Frank Clark good as well. What we saw from Chris Jones in the AFC champ, that guy was but that's not the guy I remember. I remember a good football player. I didn't see that coming. And if he can wreck the Super Bowl like that, then I think the light turns on real bright for Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid and Eric Bieniemy in this offense to make some plays, because they'll have extra possessions. They'll have extra opportunities because he's creating havoc. If he doesn't, right, the narrative of the Eagles, and this is the funny part, is, well, you don't need a great quarterback. Just put all these great, perfect weapons around him. You talk about guys like Miles Sanders in the backfield. We are Penn State. You talk about A.J. Brown on one side, Devontae Smith on the other side, Dallas Goedert, all these playmakers. probably 2 Hall of Famers on that offensive line, and you go, well, man, that's kind of a different deal. Like, they're doing it by protecting the quarterback and letting the playmakers do all the work, letting the outside guys be the key. So the narratives are very different. But I think it's a line of scrimmage league, and it comes down to whether or not Chris Jones and Frank Clark can create more havoc than, and bear with me, I'm about to say like 10 names, than Linval Joseph, Hassan Reddick, Ndamukong Suh, Javon Hargrove. I mean, I could go down the list. They got 9 guys that they rotate at that defensive line. If they create a bunch of havoc and keep Patrick Mahomes in the pocket and be able to get after him with really 4, even though Reddick is considered a linebacker, he comes off the edge all the time.
Right.
But if they can get after Mahomes consistently with 4, I think it looks completely different. So I'll say, guys, it's a line of scrimmage league. Who can get after the quarterback? And the number I'm going to give you is 4. Whoever can get 4 sacks or more, I think that's the football team that wins the game.
That's the prop bet right there.
There you go.
Yeah, I agree with that. Personally, I think it's Mahomes to lose. I mean, he's been there before. I mean, 5 straight trips to the AFC Championship game. I mean, it's just incredible. Best I've seen since Tom Brady, obviously. But I have a question. This is the most important thing when it comes to Super Bowl Sunday for me. It's the food spread.
We know Reggie wants to talk about food.
We're all big time food guys here. I mean, what does your ideal Super Bowl Sunday food spread look like?
I mean, it's got to include wings first and foremost. Like, I don't care what else happens. You better have wings. I've got a buddy who throws a Super Bowl party every year that we go to. It's a crew of us. We kind of all get together, and his house setup is great because we can sit outside. He's got a screened-in porch where we can sit out there and have our cigars, and there's a TV out there too. So life is really, really good at his house. But the spread is endless. It starts with wings, but it also includes ribs, and then it goes from there into everything you can imagine, from sausage to collard greens to baked beans. I mean, we have everything there. But I tell anybody, if you don't have wings or you don't have some kind of a good dip, whether it's a 7-layer dip, whether it's a queso dip, whether it's a Rotel dip, like if you don't have like 5 dips, I'm leaving your party before it starts. Like if I walk in and look, if you need me to bring some wangs or hook up some dip, I got you. I can cook. Don't get it twisted. But if I walk in and you don't have wings or multiple dips, I'm leaving your party before the game starts.
See, this is lame. I've always been a big pizza guy. If you don't got pizza, I think the whole party is off. There's one thing I got to ask you that's not NFL related or college basketball related. Let's go back to the college football season. My favorite bet of the entire year was Utah in the Rose Bowl versus Penn State. As our listeners know, I mean, you're former Penn State football player, alumni. Explain to me why you think that this Penn State season was a success, because what I thought going into that game was this is the worst team I've ever seen in a Rose Bowl. You guys got a little bit lucky with a couple of key injuries with Dalton Kincaid going out and their starting quarterback. Explain to me why that was a good win and why that was a good year last year.
Well, I think it was a good win mainly because of the perception that this football team and this program was struggling. And you needed an opportunity against a team that many thought was pretty good to get a win. I think the other piece of it, to me, more than anything, I thought this was a Penn State football team that at times wasn't physical. They weren't willing or able to show that they would get in the trenches and fight people and take the punches and throw them back, right? We saw this team get absolutely destroyed by the Wolverines at the line of scrimmage. They gave up 400 yards rushing. That screams soft, right? That does not scream toughness. Well, if you know the history, and I know you do, I'm talking to the viewers, anybody that knows the history of Utah football with Kyle Whittingham as the head coach, they know that the number one word is physical. And Penn State needed to show that they could deal with playing against a physical football team. I'm not suggesting Utah is Michigan. I'm not suggesting Utah is Ohio State. But what I am suggesting is Penn State needed to show that they could handle physicality in a big spot, in a big game, and they were able to do that. I think the other piece of it was the narrative around Sean Clifford and a lot of guys that, were not going to play in the game. Joey Porter Jr., one of those guys that's getting ready for the NFL, and I don't blame him for doing that. Don't get me wrong.
Right. Yeah.
So when you look at the team and when you look at, and trust me, Sean Clifford wanted to play well because he wanted to try to prove to the fan base that James Franklin wasn't wrong in sticking with him instead of going with the young quarterbacks. And so I think the message and the reason why that game was considered a success was they got over the hump against a physical Utah football team, which a lot of people, in my opinion, and guys in my circle, some of us that even played there, didn't feel like we had shown that we could deal with a physical football team throughout the season. And we finally showed that in that game. So I think that's why that game was a success. When you look at the season, I think it became a success, honestly, when Ohio State backed into the playoff, because you start looking at Penn State's record and you go, man, the only two teams they lost to now, granted, again, I'm going to say it again, 400 yards rushing against Michigan. You can't allow that to happen. But you see Ohio State back in the playoffs and you look up and you go, those are the only two teams that we lost to. So from that standpoint, you have to look at it in some vein as a success. And I know we've gotten to the point to where everybody looks around and says, if you don't make the playoffs, it's a bad season. Well, here's the thing I remind any and everybody. If you're upset about winning 11 games, what are you asking your programs to do? Because I think, and you guys, we've had this conversation, right? The narrative about what we've seen from Nick Saban and how everybody thinks that their team or school should be able to do that, it's just false, man. Like, you guys know, you're Michigan guy. You have every resource possible. But at the same point in time, every now and then, and I mean this 1,000% respectfully, it might be the best player in the state of Michigan. He may just decide, I just want to leave the state and go play somewhere else. And that's the hardest part of recruiting. That's the hardest part of building teams. Sometimes the best player that you think you're going to get, that's a homegrown kid, sometimes they just don't want to come. And then the other thing, and I think you guys know this better than anybody, can you imagine if Jim Harbaugh would have left 3 years ago and somebody else came in and tried to do it a different way, i.e. Rich Rodriguez, just using that as an example, and how long it takes to get back to that point. So for me, if you're winning 10 games a year, all I'm saying is if you're going to fire the coach, damn it, you better be 1,000% right in the next hire, because if not, it can go south real quick. Guys, I grew up, I'm originally from Memphis, and I remember I argued with my dad when they were talking about firing Tubby Smith because the recruits he was getting was not, on the level of, oh, they're not top 50 recruits, this, that, and the third. Well, here's what I'll say. Penny Hardaway's taken over. Do you see consistency in getting to the NCAA tournament? Because I don't. But Tubby Smith, historically, that's all he ever did was find a way to get to NCAA tournaments. So I asked people in that fan base, I've asked this of my dad, when they fired Tubby Smith, did they get it 1,000% right? Yeah. And if Jim Harbaugh would have left, who's the head coach at Michigan now? Like, I was laughing, and I love you guys, you know that, but I know some other Michigan fans, and they were like, good riddance, Jim Harbaugh, leave. I hope you go to the NFL. And I'm going, hey, man, you remember a couple years ago when you wanted him to leave, and then you were real happy and you wanted to give him an extension because you made the playoffs? You got to pick one. It's a tough place to live when you don't know if you can just win 8 or 9 games. So to me, if you're winning 10, 11 games a year, is it a success? Yes. Is it what you want? No. You can always hope and want for a national championship, but you guys know our division rival, you guys truly hate them, right? The Buckeyes. Ryan Day is 45-6 as a head coach. Yeah. And there are people in Columbus that want him gone because he's lost the last 2 games against Michigan. Look, man, I'm not saying you shouldn't beat your rival, but there can be bigger problems than being 0 for the last 2 against Michigan.
Right. Yeah, you got that right. Well, I'll tell you, we're all 3 big Harbaugh fans. I first of all, Jared's question about Penn State, I think that comes mainly from he had Utah as the big lock, and he lost his life savings. So we'll get that on the table right now.
Well, I didn't do my due diligence.
And the injuries were a factor. I'm not going to sit here and say I think the injuries that Utah dealt with in that game, namely the quarterback, I think that's why Penn State was able to pull away. I think that game would have probably gone down to the last 2 or 3 possessions if those guys were still healthy and were able to finish the game. But I do think I'm not going to sit here and act like the injury to specifically their quarterback was not a factor in that game. the way that we look at the quarterback position in football, an injury to a quarterback is always going to be a factor, even if sometimes I think in the way that we value the quarterback, we overvalue the quarterback.
Yeah, well, look at San Francisco and what happened in their playoff game, I mean, just that simple. But I have a question, if you're down in Carolina, we've talked about Harbaugh a little bit here. What are some of your thoughts about Jim Harbaugh in general?
Almost became the Panthers coach, allegedly, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. When you look at the cycle, and look, I don't mean any disrespect to Frank Reich, but I wanted to see Steve Wilkes get the job. I thought he had earned the right to get an opportunity. But when you looked at the candidates that were out there, and I'm going to put them in a somewhat of an order at the top, I would say of the coaching candidates that were out there, obviously Sean Payton is a coach that has won a Super Bowl. You got to put him at the top of the list. After that, Jim Harbaugh got to a Super Bowl as a head coach. I feel like you got to kind of slot him in there at number 2. And then after that, Frank Reich won a Super Bowl as an offensive coordinator. He was near the top of that list as well. So when you look at what candidates were out there, outside of Sean Payton, you would be hard-pressed to bring me a resume that would have been stronger than Jim Harbaugh's to be a head coach in the National Football League based on what he's already accomplished, not at college, already in this league. I believe it's something like 44, 30, somewhere in the 30s and 1 with a Super Bowl appearance. And he did it. He was one of the first guys, right, to take a team to the Super Bowl with a quarterback that did it a different way with Colin Kaepernick.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of Michigan coaches, maybe play devil's advocate here or just kind of break a tie or join my side. I said, a pot or two ago, I'm out on Juwan Howard. This year, the Greg Gard incident, they've had some success in the tournament under him, but I feel like the recruiting hasn't really been there. Where do you stand on Juwan Howard? Do you think that he's going to kind of right the ship with Michigan? Do you think he's a good coach, or are you starting to see maybe the beginning of the end here with his tenure as Michigan's head coach?
I think I may be seeing the beginning of the end, and I think the main reason why is Juwan Howard's still an old school guy. And I, as you guys know, especially you, Bernsey, I've got a relationship with one of the members of the Fab Five, and I'm able to kind of talk to him and get some ideas and some insight. Juwan's kind of an old school mindset in a lot of ways when it comes to basketball. Now, can he connect with young kids? Absolutely. But let's face it, a lot of these kids now, they may not remember him as a player, number one, but number two, and more importantly, with the way the transfer portal is and NIL and all these things going on, I think for Juwan, the hard part is for him to get kids to understand the overall process of development as opposed to the overall process of just putting up numbers. And obviously when they had the most success, and now I had the kid's name and I just drew a blank. They had the young the young guard, I want to say Livers, but he was a transfer, an older guy that understood how to play and understood that, with the process, and he was the guy trying to help the young guys understand how to come along. You don't get that as much anymore because there's so many guys that bounce around and move around. You can't build with young guys learning from that older guy as well as you used to be able to over a multitude of years. And so I think that's part of what's hurting the program. And I also think Juwan he's a different dude. And I think, I think he knows X's and O's, but I think, and as great as it is to be able to coach at your alma mater, there's a reason why a lot of coaches start at smaller schools and then get those kinds of jobs. And a lot of it is because they need to learn how to adjust to not having certain things and then get to the point to where they have everything and know how to manage it all and know how to deal with everything and all the pieces and how to coach certain players. I don't know that Juwan really had an opportunity to have that experience because he spent so much time in the NBA for so long.
Yeah, I mean, we see Patrick Ewing is not having success at Georgetown. You already brought up Penny Hardaway. It's not going well at Memphis. I think, and there's a few others that have tried to, like Mike Woodson at Indiana. That seems to be going pretty well. But like you said, he had plenty of other head coaching experience before he went to Indiana. So he maybe had some chances to figure it out. I think, Jared kind of said it. I'm not out on Juwan. My opinion is he's got to figure out the roster construction thing. I think he's got to figure out the right guys to get in. He's got to figure out how to properly, I guess, use the transfer portal, because that's just today's college basketball. You got to be able to get some transfers. I said last week, I think that's where Tom Izzo needs to adjust. Izzo's not really using the transfer portal much right now, and it's kind of hurting MSU's depth. I think that's the biggest thing to me with Juwan. He's got to figure out the right guys to recruit, the right guys to get in the portal, because you got to have some veterans and you've got to have obviously some talent. Speaking of recruiting, we were talking before we kind of started recording. Michigan is big on a stud down here in Charlotte. We're both here in the Charlotte area. Jaden Davis is a 5-star quarterback, plays at Providence Day down here in Charlotte. Michigan has J.J. McCarthy right now, and their plan is when J.J. McCarthy is done to go right to Jaden Davis. That's the plan. Davis has not committed yet to Michigan, so that's a little bit on the edge right now. But you said that you've had a chance to call a couple of his games in high school. So I'm just curious, what you've seen. Michigan fans are high on him. A lot of people are high on him. Would he step in and take right over for J.J. McCarthy, or what have you seen from that kid?
He's the type of kid that has that kind of talent. He's the type of kid that has that kind of ability in terms of being able to make every single throw you need to make, being able to understand what defenses are trying to do to him. All of those things have been something that, when I see him play, I go, man, this kid is unbelievable in that regard. He's a true born leader. And guys around him play really, really hard, and they play well, and they understand that he is their quintessential leader. I see a guy that galvanizes a locker room, galvanizes a football team. And like I said, he doesn't miss many throws. Guys, I'm going to give you a little bit of a hint and a tip. Okay. And this may not matter at all, but I think it does. There's a young man by the name of Liam Gruel who is committed to Michigan. I believe he's actually signed with Michigan. He is a tight end / long snapper.
Okay.
All right.
Classic Jim Harbaugh football player.
He's Jaden Davis's tight end in high school.
Okay.
Liam Gruel's going to Michigan. I'm not saying.
Right.
I'm just saying.
It's good to get those connections.
And all I'm saying is this. If Jim Harbaugh decided he's going to take Gruel because Gruel, and I don't know that they're best friends. They may not like each other at all. I don't know. But let's just say Gruel and Jaden Davis, that those guys each best friend on the team.
Right.
Probably smart that he took Liam Gruel.
Right.
Who's going to Michigan. He'll be in Michigan this fall. So it might be his job to go there and figure out, okay, what does it look like? Okay, this is the right place. Hey, Jaden, come on up here. I'm just saying. But Jaden Davis is, guys, he's as advertised, physically talented, big arm, can make all the throws, make all the reads. And I think the thing that, because of the way recruiting works, and a lot of people view him as a pocket passer because he can make all the throws, he's athletic enough to not get himself killed in the pocket, guys. He can move a little bit as well. And when he starts moving around, he moves around to make plays down the field. And I know someone who coached him at the high school he was at before that, and they say this kid is the real deal, and he is super unselfish. He understands, yes, he's got to make all the throws, and he's the quarterback, but his focal point is making sure the right guy gets the ball in the right situation so that they can win football games. I think that would bode well for Michigan if they are able to get him. Whoever gets Jaden Davis is getting a true stud quarterback.
It's hard for me to get excited about Michigan football right now. I'm being honest. After that TCU game, I mean, we talked about it ad nauseum. It's embarrassing. Looking ahead to kind of the here and now with college basketball, kind of another depressing topic. I mean, you're covering it, daily. We've kind of been under the assumption that it seems like this year it's kind of really sort of plummeted in popularity in a sense. There doesn't seem to be, the superstar players like a Holmgren. A lot of the best, Wembanyama, Henderson aren't even playing college basketball this year. Do you think that college basketball is really suffering, and do you think it's kind of heading down a dark path?
I think people are lost. People don't know who's where. Like, it takes you – it's bad enough that no one pays attention to college basketball until January, right? Or February in some cases.
Yeah, February.
And then you add to the fact that once you do start paying attention, then you got to go, wait, I thought he played at When the hell did he get to my? By the time you figure out who's where, it's tournament time. And I think that's part of the problem. I think the other problem is, right, and this is where I think there's danger in the way that they're selling college athletics and matchups. And it really starts in football and it bleeds into basketball, right? Because there was a lot of conversation about whether TCU should make the playoff, and people wanted the schools that had more, I guess, cachet in terms of TV viewership and all that. Well, when you start to push that in college basketball, and then those programs are not quite as dominant anymore because guys that were the 6th and 7th and 8th guys in their rotation are starting at Oakland, or they're starting at, a school like Tulsa, or they're starting at, insert Murray State, right? All of a sudden, when that talent is much more spread out, now everybody looking for Michigan and Michigan State to be in the top 5, and you think about Florida and what they did with the 2 national championships back to back with Billy. When you start looking for those teams and they're not there, and they're not looking dominant, you start looking around going, what's wrong? Well, the only thing that's wrong is that the transfer portal created more parity than people thought. Right. Because what's happening now is your schools like your Oral Roberts, right, with Max Absmus, right, as great as he was in the tournament last year, they're able to go get a guy from, say, Texas, and this is not necessarily true. This is just an example. Right. They're able to go get a guy who was supposed to be sort of the future of that program. Now he's at Oral Roberts, and they're able to make a run in the tournament and beat a couple of the Power 5 teams, right? And the tournament starts looking different. The regular season starts. I watched the game last night. I watched the end of Gonzaga and St. Mary's.
That came out of the Charlotte office right now.
That's right. And the difference with those 2 basketball teams from what we saw in the past, right? And St. Mary's has always been kind of the one team in the West Coast Conference that's given Gonzaga some problems. Well, now here's the difference. Gonzaga has still really good players. They don't have the better athletes anymore.
Right.
They just have really good players. And now all of a sudden, St. Mary's has really good players, and the athletes are on equal footing. It looks different because now everybody's realizing also, in addition to, right, not going to the big schools, these guys are understanding it doesn't matter where I go. If I can play, I'm going to get in the tournament and people are going to see me.
Yeah.
And that's what's becoming part of the problem. And I think that's why when you look around and you look at, a lot of programs that would bring players in and develop them. Listen, Coach K, he fought the one and done concept for a long time, and then he had to accept it or he wasn't going to have success. Well, that's why he got out. We already talked about Villanova earlier and Jay Wright about the way he wanted to run a developmental program, bring guys in their 3rd, 4th year. They're going to be quality players. And because of that, Villanova was always really good. Here comes the transfer portal. Here comes NIL. And the reason I'm telling you guys right now, NIL and transfer portal are mutually exclusive. Okay. Not only did they essentially come in at the same time, but because they are there, you've got people back channeling kids, offering them NIL money to go in the portal. But then guess what happens, right? If I know Matt is a all conference level 2 guard, right? I get somebody to back channel him and say, hey man, if you jump in the portal, there is, $50,000 a year worth of NIL money at Oakland, right? And so Matt's going, man, I'm going to jump in the portal. I'm going to get some NIL money. I'll be the main guy over there. This is perfect.
Yeah.
So Matt jumps in the portal the day the season ends. Well, what Matt didn't realize was Jared is a 3-time all-conference guy in the Big Ten, and he's looking for a new home. He jumps in the portal at the same time. He plays the same position.
Right.
Ted, as the coach, goes, well, Jared's had more success. I'm going to take Jared. Now Matt's looking for a spot, and you're hung out to dry.
Right.
So if you don't think this thing is mutually exclusive, man, I'm telling anybody that'll listen, you're crazy. That thing is mutually exclusive, and it is a dangerous game being played, and the kids have to be smart and understand who's telling them the truth and who's lying. But I say all that to say, yes, that is what could and may be the eventual downfall, not just of college basketball, but it's impacting college football as well. If you can't navigate that portal right, man, it gets you in a lot of trouble. But the problem is it's so hard to navigate because the kids that ultimately got a lot more power in it, they're still being pulled in these different directions by people that may not really have their best interests at heart. And I've always said, if you want to clean this thing up, you got to find somebody, some person, some arm, some consultants. I don't know what the answer is. Find somebody to advise these people that get nothing out of the process of advising them one way or the other.
Wow.
Good
well,
luck.
I like this. It's amazing. This guy Reggie mixes our names in there. He's a true pro, man. Got one final question for you, Reggie, before we let you go. I mean, and this has been a lot of fun. We have a little semi-regular segment called Tedtertainment Tonight. You know, we put out there our favorite TV shows, movies, whatnot. What are you watching when you do have rare free time? What are you checking out on Netflix or HBO or whatever? What's your go-to that you would recommend?
All right, I'm gonna tell
to our
myself
listeners?
I am a ridiculously crazy Chicago PD fan. Like my man Voight, like that whole crew, Intelligence. Like I don't miss that show, and I don't know where it comes from, but like I don't miss that show.
Okay.
I'll another one. I'll admit I do watch All American. Anything about football, I'm going to watch it, right?
Yep.
And that's sort of my a guilty pleasure. Law and Order, Organized Crime. I wasn't a big when they brought the old Stabler back. I was like, man, we don't need this. Like, what are we doing? But like the cases and the organized crime, like it's a different world, so it's kind of cool. So I've been watching that as well. Those are some of the main ones, and then you get me any kind of like, you know, like. There's a bunch of like barbecue kind of shows on Netflix and stuff. Like I get into like barbecue. Like I'm a big dude, man. I'm Chusky. That's chunky and husky for everybody trying to figure that out. I'm Chusky. So I like to know like who's doing what on the barbecue tip. So I watch a lot of that as well. So those are the main things. But like, you know, I'll say to anybody, like somebody calls, hey man, I'm doing such, and then I'm like, at like 9:30, I'm like, hey, listen. Hey man, it's a PD night. I gotta go. Like I gotta watch Chicago PD. Like I don't miss that show. I've never met him, but shout out to LaRoyce Hawkins. I think he does a great job as Kevin Atwater on that show as well. It's a really cool show that I really get into. Shout out to Dick Wolf because he keeps it going. It's a good, crazy, zany crew that I think it's just one of those shows that they grabbed me and I'm sticking with it. So. That's probably the main one right now.
All right.
I got to slide in real quick, Ted, just because so Reggie, I want to get your kind of a food connoisseur. You're a barbecue master. What do you think of Ted's, 4th of July spread from a couple years ago where he had chips and hot dogs with ketchup? That was the spread. What do you
get out of here?
That's what it was. The only condiment, ketchup. What do you think of
that? No, that's a failure. Listen,
Jared's a failure.
By no means. I mean, first of all, if you're going with anything, hot dogs, bratwurst, sausage, any of that, you got to have mustard available.
Yes.
And depending on what else you're doing in terms of whether it's hot dogs or bratwurst, you got to have sauerkraut available. You got to have relish available. Like, Ted, what are we doing here? I got to get on Jared's side and kind of give you. I gotta poke the bear and figure out what the heck you were thinking. If the only condiment
Reggie,
was ketchup,
don't listen to what Jared's saying. I'll tell you, there was ketchup was out there. It was a little bit of a fail, but the mustard and all the other condiments came out shortly afterwards. So
okay, then you're good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and they had to be Kogel's hot dogs, right?
Kogel hot dogs. Reggie probably doesn't even know what those are. Do you?
I've heard of them.
They're awesome.
I have not had them. So I'm going to put that on Matt to get some shipped down here, and I'll try them.
They'd have to get shipped.
And Jared, hey, man, be nice, man. Stall them out, Debo.
Right.
Hey, I mean, he usually has a good spread. That's why it stuck out after all these years because it was so puzzling. I've never seen something like that from Ted. I mean,
by the way, that's the last spread he's gone to, Reggie. Not been invited since.
I was about to say, it sounds like he's not going to get invited anymore. Now, speaking of spreads, I have to say this, and I'm going away from food. Guys, I mean, it's fun being on here, and you know I got the virtual background because my crib's a mess right now.
Love
Ted, man, that you live in a dream. That's a spread behind you there. Now I see how you roll, big dog.
That's my man cave, baby. You know,
that looks legendary. I see the Fab Five right there over your right shoulder.
Oh yeah,
I see it.
This got some high school jerseys too.
Got Bowl there. Yeah. I do it upright. All right.
And I have always wanted to ask, the Corona 21, is that your high school basketball jersey?
To tell you the truth, that is my actual jersey. Okay. Cool. I actually wore that jersey. In our day, Reggie, you're visiting, when you wore your away uniforms, they were odd numbers, and the home uniforms were even numbers. You don't even see that anymore, right?
That's kind of crazy. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
No, my first high school, I had a different number on the road than I did away. It was interesting as well, but the number I wanted to wear, I couldn't wear because it was retired for at that time, because the guy that wore it, actually the year before I got to high school, had passed away. He was still in high school when it happened, so I couldn't wear the number I would have wanted to wear, even though if he were alive, I wouldn't have been able to wear the number because he was going to be the starter and not me anyway. So
right.
I guess I don't know what I was mad about, but it's always interesting to hear the stories of the high school jerseys, and I remember those times as well where it was a different number.
No, we've talked about it before too, where nowadays you go watch an NBA game or something, you can't even tell who the home team is because of the color schemes, right? Used to be white at home and color on the road.
Right.
Yeah.
I remember when my the jerseys we wore in football my senior year, at our high school anyway, not every high school probably does this, but like when the varsity team gets new jerseys, those last ones go down to JV.
Yep.
And then, and then the freshman gets the next hand-me-down. So like they kind of go through the years. And I remember when the jerseys that I wore, when they went down to JV, I wanted to call up the AD or, the coach and be like, send me what I wore. JV doesn't need that. Give me one of them. Like, give me my jersey. Now that varsity's done with it, I'll take my number 81 and I'm going to put it in a frame like Ted did back there.
Let me ask you guys this, and it's something I've noticed, because I know when I was in high school, you had a 9th grade team, you had a JV team, and you had a varsity team.
Right.
It seems to me, I'm not hearing a lot about 9th grade teams anymore. Do they even exist?
Not like they did in the past. I mean, it's a lot of schools have eliminated it and just put the freshmen on the JV. I mean, I think because, Reggie, in my own opinion, there's so many different sports nowadays, so the participation is down in specific sports. That's the only thing I can figure out.
Right. Maybe I think with basketball, it seems like there's still a lot of freshmen, but football, it does seem like it's mostly JV and varsity.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it's the specialization of so many sports, and
it's
funny because doing some of these high school games, and you talk to these coaches, and you're like, "How many kids do you have that play other sports?" And they're like, maybe 2. I'm like, "What?"
That's a shame.
Back in our day, man, it was like everybody. Like if you were let's redo this. If you were a basketball player, there was a high probability you also played football and did something else in the spring. Probably ran track or baseball, right? Like, but everybody played something in the fall, the winter, and the spring. Like that was just the way it was, and you just don't see that anymore.
Not as much. Nope. Absolutely. Well, let's leave it there, Reggie. This has been just awesome chatting with you, getting caught up. You're a man that's on the hustle, busy all over the place. Tell us the best spot that our listeners can catch up with you and stay in tune. And definitely we won't wait so long to have you back for another appearance.
Well, I'll say this, guys, and this is not, I love you guys, and you can see right there next to my name over there.
Yep, there.
Boom. The Shutdown Corner podcast. You can just go to my Twitter account and get a link there. Every week, we started it last fall. I had a great sponsor that rolled with me through the football season. They've wrapped up, but if somebody's looking to sponsor, we're ready for that too. But podcast comes out every week, and then we air live on the radio on Saturday mornings here in Charlotte as well. So check out the Shutdown Corner podcast. You can get a link there from my Twitter account at rwalk13. I usually pin a tweet about the podcast with links every week, and it's on Spotify, Apple, anywhere you get podcasts, you can find it there. So check us out. Find me. Most of the time, it's me and a guest, but always a good time.
Awesome.
Excellent. Well, again, thanks for the time, Reggie, and we'll catch up with you down the road, man.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Have a good week.